They enter the earth where daylight cannot follow, lighting fat-fueled lamps and carrying tinder that breathes briefly in the still air. And here, in the long corridors and remote chambers of Ice Age Europe, they place images on stone that endure through glacial winters and interludes of thaw. In this darkness, figures of horses, lions, woolly rhinoceros, bison, and mammoth stand in mineral pigments whose chemistry binds to calcite skins and rough limestone grain, and the cave becomes a surface for memory that outlasts the footsteps that brought it into being. The fact is, plain in the evidence among the oldest known figurative paintings in Europe, the walls of Chauvet in the Ardèche retain charcoal lines and shaded forms dated by radiocarbon to roughly 36 millennia before the present, a period when modern humans already range across varied ecologies of the continent, and when the last glacial cycle tightens its grip on northern latitudes. Calcite draperies sometimes overlie pigment, allowing uranium-thorium measurements that confirm the antiquity of layers, while microscopic analysis of stroke order shows deliberate sequencing of contour shading and superimposition that speaks to practiced hands at work. They prepare color from iron oxides for reds and browns, and from manganese-rich minerals for deep blacks, grind powders on cobbles, and mix them with water, saliva, or animal fat. They apply pigment with fingers pads of hide or bundles of chewed plant fibers, and sometimes they blow it through hollow bird bones or reeds to create stencils and soft halos around edges, a technique that smooths transitions where stone undulates into shadow. Lesser-known traces linger beside the grand scenes. A child's footprints print a passageway floor in one cave, their small steps crossing torch smear marks along the wall. In another, a sequence of ladder-like dots proceeds into a narrow gallery, as if leading from one panel to the next, while ceiling soot preserves the faint geometry of lamp smoke in air currents that no longer move. Shallow cupules, small intentionally pecked, depressions cluster near animal panels, their purpose uncertain, but their arrangement too regular to be accidental. At Lascaux and elsewhere, post holes and niches align where scaffolding once stood, allowing painters to reach high domes where the stone's curve carries a horse into motion when firelight travels across it. The surfaces they choose are not random. They map images to the rock's shape, placing a lion's shoulder across a bulge that catches and releases light as a torch approaches, and the animation, suggested by layered legs and repeated outlines, lets a bison seem to trot as flame flicker mimics gait. In some chambers, researchers note enhanced echoes or resonant frequencies close to panels, an observation that raises the possibility that sound and image once worked together. Though this remains debated and no single explanation yet commands consensus. Outside the caves, the planet reorganizes itself. Ice caps wax over Scandinavia, and the British Isles' alpine glaciers deepen their troughs, and sea levels fall by tens of meters as water locks into ice, exposing broad shelves and extending coasts. Winds sweep lows into thick mantles over river valleys. Cold steppe spreads and herds of large herbivores roam across corridors that run for thousands of kilometers, while forests retreat to milder refuges along Atlantic margins and southern peninsulas. In this context of shifting ecologies, small human groups track river systems, follow migration routes, and navigate seasonal resources, carrying knowledge of stone fire and pigment between shelters, cliffs, and the deep interior of karst landscapes. The caves themselves are seldom places of habitation. Hearth debris is sparse in decorated chambers, and the costly effort of entering remote passages suggests a particular intention that exceeds the needs of shelter or butchery. Yet the exact nature of that intention remains unresolved. Were the paintings parts of initiation, cycles, repositories of group knowledge about animals, and routes, modes of communication across generations, or elements of ceremony that anchored identity when the climate wavered? and the ground itself advanced and retreated beneath ice. Some scholars point to the presence of repeated signs, combs, dots, brackets, and claviform marks whose patterning might encode information, while others caution that regularity alone does not prove script and the meaning stays beyond present reach. They paint predators and prey with equal care, recording lions that lack manes and rhinoceros seen in profile with paired horns inclined, and they place animals in clusters that hint at seasonal congregations, though the temporal depth of superimposed figures means panels may compile imagery across years or lifetimes. Charcoal from torches leaves smears on walls where hands brush during passage, and finger-traced lines in soft clay record the pressure of touch so closely that a modern reader can see individual finger widths in the panel's rills. Beside some images, calcite curtains slowly form sealing paint behind translucent mineral veils that prove the panel was already ancient when later visitors arrived. The simple tools, stone lamps, bone blowpipes, hide, daubers produce effects that feel sophisticated in their control of volume and shadow. Scraped backgrounds lighten the rock to make a belly or flank stand forward. Shading, by hatching, builds depth. The painters use the rock's fractures as ground lines or horizon edges, letting a crack become a back or a tail. In places, they incise before painting, scoring guides into the surface to hold the contour in the lamp's trembling light. And in the margins of panels, animal tracks, claviforms, and barbed signs gather into constellations whose relationships are studied but not yet conclusively read. A lesser-noted detail lies underfoot. In some decorated caves, the soft floor preserves trampling marks of both humans and cave bears, the latter leaving claw-scraped resting hollows and polished wall patches where heavy bodies brushed repeatedly against stone. In a few chambers, painted rhinos or bears cross older bear-scratch scars, suggesting that the image makers worked in spaces actively used by the animals they represented, a proximity that complicates any simple separation between observation and imagination. The unresolved core remains the why, whether the act of painting consolidates alliances between scattered bands, stabilizes shared stories, in a time of climatic volatility, instructs novices in behavior around powerful animals, or participates in practices now inaccessible to inference. Multiple hypotheses may apply at once, and the record, while abundant, does not choose among them for us. The planetary scale frames every brush of pigment. As glaciers grow, the atmosphere carries more dust, and sunlight scatters differently. River mouths push outward across exposed shelves, and freshwater plumes change coastal ecologies. Corridors open and close as ice margins advance and retreat, and through these rhythms, small groups persist, carrying recipes for pigment, along with napping traditions, hearth habits, and memories of routes between valleys and caves. A journey from wintering ground to decorated cavern may span more distance than many of their descendants will travel in years, and the return season after season renews both pathway and image. They do not sign their pictures in letters, but their presence is everywhere in the negative handprints that ring moments of breath around palms and fingers, in the distinct proportions of feet impressed in clay, in the cadence of torches lifted and lowered as they assess a panel before beginning, and in the repeat of forms whose elegance arises from observation sharpened by need. The animals on the walls, layered and reworked, are not merely counted, but understood in mass posture and movement. The painters place them where rock volume can receive them and where fire will later let them move again. What remains certain is the fact of the art itself and its age, the secure dates on charcoal figures, and the stratigraphic relations that fix a relative order to panels and smears. What remains less clear are the rituals or intentions that once gathered people here and bound them to the images. And what persists still is the way stone and shadow collaborate with pigment and fire to make something that lasts beyond individuals, beyond lifetimes, beyond even the landscapes outside the cave entrance, which shift with ice and sea and wind, while the horses and lions continue to inhabit these walls awaiting the next pool of light. Long before the great painted horses of Chauvet or the bison of Lascaux marks appear on the surfaces of stone and bone that carry no likeness to animals, yet speak of intention beyond the utilitarian. In southern Africa, pieces of ochre more than 70,000 years old are incised with crosshatch patterns, straight lines intersecting in deliberate arrangements, and in Blombos Cave, such fragments suggest an early grasp of symbolic design, though their precise meaning remains elusive. Elsewhere, engraved shells from Trinil in Java, associated with Homo erectus nearly 500,000 years ago, bear zigzag incisions that may be the oldest known deliberate engravings on record, though debate continues about whether they served a symbolic role or were casual experiments with sharp tools. These artifacts remind us that art does not begin suddenly at 40,000 years ago with the full flourish of animal paintings, but rather unfolds gradually as abstract signs and geometric forms anticipate later figurative expression. They also emphasize that multiple human species contributed to the deep prehistory of symbolic marking, and that the emergence of such behaviors does not follow a simple linear path. Archaeologists examine engraved bones, carved notches, and repeating incisions with microscopic attention, noting that the grooves are too regular and too intentional to be byproducts of butchery or tool sharpening. In some cases, they are positioned in places that have no functional purpose, as on the flat surfaces of ochre nodules, or on unused portions of bone, a detail that signals a leap toward representation, even if the representation is not yet an image of the natural world. Lesser-known finds amplify this pattern in a site on the Indian subcontinent. Pieces of red ochre with striations appear alongside stone blades, while in Europe, notched bird bones and perforated bear teeth appear at sites predating the Great Painted Caves. A shell bead, found more than 100 kilometers from its coastal origin, demonstrates that objects with symbolic or ornamental significance could travel long distances, suggesting not only artistry, but also networks of exchange. Each mark raises the unresolved question of intent. Were these incisions purely decorative, or did they carry specific meanings comprehensible only within a group, perhaps denoting affiliation, ownership, or memory? Or were they simply byproducts of human curiosity and exploration of how sharp edges could alter surfaces? The absence of direct testimony forces reliance on context, repeated patterns, care in execution and association with pigments strengthen the case for symbolism. Yet scholars remain cautious, aware that projection of modern artistic categories risks obscuring the actual cognitive world of early humans. At planetary scale, these earliest symbols coincide with climates that oscillate between wetter and drier phases, shaping landscapes into corridors and refuges that influenced where groups lived and how they encountered resources. In Africa, shifts in monsoon cycles transformed the Sahara into green savannas, and then back into desert, alternately connecting and isolating populations. During wetter intervals, lakes and rivers supported larger gatherings, perhaps encouraging the transmission of shared signs and engravings. In drier times, retreat to coastal refuges may have concentrated communities where ochre use and symbolic traditions intensified. The rhythm of these climatic swings means that symbolic behavior is not a static achievement, but one that arises, diminishes, and resurfaces as environments change. Cultural practices must be maintained across generations, and each fluctuation of population density or survival pressure tests their continuity. The earliest pigments themselves tell a story. Ground hematite and specularite in southern Africa, selected for color and sheen, appear in context that show grinding stone stained with red residues, suggesting repeated and intentional preparation. The quantity and consistency of use implies that pigment carried a value beyond mere utility, though ochre might have been used for hide preservation or adhesive preparation. The deliberate choice of bright red and the transport of nodules far from their sources indicate that color mattered as symbol. Small engraved objects further show the portability of meaning. Unlike cave paintings bound to walls, these items could travel with individuals, accompany burials, or circulate through exchange, extending symbolic traditions across distances measured in hundreds of kilometers. The wide distribution of similar beads and ornaments across regions hints that recognition of shared signs was part of how early humans identified themselves and others. Yet the scientific mystery persists. Why geometry first before naturalistic images? Does abstraction precede representation because it requires less observational skill? Or does it emerge because what matters most in early symbolic systems is not depiction of animals, but creation of a code, however simple, that signals thought and belonging? Some scholars suggest that the repetitive nature of crosshatches and zigzags may connect to rhythms of speech memory aids or mnemonic devices. But without direct evidence, these remain hypotheses that cannot be tested conclusively. The scale of movement reinforces the weight of these early symbols. A journey of several days across semi-arid plains could bring ochre from distant quarries to cave sites where it was ground and marked a commitment of labor and planning equal to migrations that stretched longer than the distance from Paris to Berlin. To carry pigment or engrave beads was to carry meaning across landscapes that changed with each generation, linking the act of marking to the act of moving. When they cut lines into ochre blocks or shells, they fix a trace of presence in material that endures longer than speech or gesture, and though the meanings are hidden from us, the persistence of form, straight lines crosses zigzags across continents, and millennia suggest that the impulse to leave marks is a recurrent element of human cognition, not a rare accident. These signs are not portraits of animals or scenes of hunt and ritual, yet they are the scaffolding upon which later images stand the proof that long before walls carried galloping horses, hands carried engraved stones, and the urge to inscribe matter was already woven into survival and identity. In the quiet record of these earliest symbols, we glimpse the threshold of art, a threshold not yet crossed into narrative painting, but one where surfaces begin to hold more than the touch of tools they hold, intention, abstraction, and perhaps the first stirrings of memory made visible. As Homo sapiens expand across Eurasia, some 50 to 40,000 years ago, their movements carry not only stone blades and fire-hardened points, but also a growing repertoire of symbolic practices that bind small, dispersed groups into cultural networks. The dispersal is shaped by glacial rhythms, ice sheets cover northern latitudes, corridors of steppe stretch from Western Europe across Central Asia, and forests retreat to southern refuges, leaving mosaic landscapes of tundra grassland and river valley, where reindeer, horse bison, and mammoth migrate. Archaeological traces show that modern humans adapt to each setting, fashioning tailored clothing, with bone needles constructing shelters from mammoth bone and hide, and using hearths that leave blackened floors across seasonal camps. Alongside these practical achievements appear ornaments, carvings, and engravings that reveal symbolic continuity across wide distances. At Kostenki on the Don River, ivory beads and decorated figurines occur within early modern human horizons. At Vogelherd in the Swabian Jura, small mammoth ivory carvings of animals are carefully shaped, sanded and polished, their creation demanding both fine tools and patient skill. The fact that similar ornaments appear across distant sites suggests a shared practice of personal display, perhaps marking identity within and between groups. A lesser-known detail comes from Sunghir in Russia, where burials more than 30,000 years old contain thousands of ivory beads each requiring hours of shaping and drilling sewn into garments that accompany the dead. The labor invested in this adornment is far beyond utilitarian need and indicates social traditions of enormous persistence and complexity. Such objects travel perforated shells found inland far from their marine origin, confirm networks that link groups separated by hundreds of kilometers. Movement along rivers and across plains facilitates contact, and with contact comes the exchange of ornament, an idea embedding symbolic traditions into the broader pattern of migration. Yet an unresolved mystery persists. Did the spread of these traditions follow population expansions in a single wave, or did multiple dispersals carry practices that converged and mingled in new regions? Genetic evidence reveals interwoven histories with traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry present in all non-African populations, suggesting repeated contacts, but whether symbolic repertoires diffused in the same way remains uncertain. The record shows sudden flourishing of carved figurines and beads in some regions, but long gaps in others, raising questions about whether cultural transmission faltered in places or whether preservation has masked a more continuous story. At planetary scale, these migrations coincide with rapid shifts in climate. Dansgaard, Ushka. Events punctuate the Ice Age with abrupt warmings altering vegetation belts and opening new corridors, while cold stadials contract habitable zones and drive populations into refugees. Sea levels fall by tens of meters, exposing coastal plains such as Doggerland in the north and Sunderland in the east, broadening the terrain across which humans move. The distances involved are immense, from the Levant into Central Asia, spans more than 3,000 kilometers, greater than the journey from Lisbon to Moscow. Yet within a few thousand years of their first presence in Europe, modern humans occupy environments from Atlantic coasts to Siberian valleys. Across this range, symbolic practices provide continuity, enabling groups to recognize and distinguish one another, to sustain traditions of art and ornament even when separated by ice mountains or steppe. They carve not only animals, but abstract signs, lines, chevrons, and dots engraved on ivory, antler, and bone, echoing the geometric marks long practiced on ochre. These signs may have served as tallies, records of season, or markers of affiliation, but their persistence suggests they mattered in ways not reducible to chance decoration. The expansion of humans into Eurasia also brings encounters with varied megafauna, and their presence in art reflects the ecological knowledge that sustains survival. At Geisenklösterle and Hohlerfels, figures of mammoth and cave lion carved in ivory capture details of tusks, manes, and posture, evidence of close observation. These images are not merely naturalistic, they also reveal a conceptual world in which humans select which creatures to depict and carry them into material, form an act that transmits knowledge across generations. Portable art allows symbolism to move with groups as they follow herds or seek new valleys. Unlike cave paintings tied to specific places, figurines and beads travel in satchels and adornments, enabling symbolic identity to persist wherever people wander. A lesser noted but significant detail lies in the standardized production of beads at multiple sites. Archaeologists have shown that drilled perforations follow similar dimensions, implying shared techniques and perhaps teaching across generations. Such regularity suggests that bead-making was not improvisation, but a tradition passed down with precision, a continuity that may have reinforced bonds across kin groups. The unresolved question remains why such symbolic elaboration accelerates at this time. Is it a product of population growth and competition with art, and ornament serving as signals of identity and alliance? Or is it rooted in cognitive thresholds, a flowering of language and abstract thought that enables symbolism to become indispensable? Or does environmental stress drive the need for cultural scaffolding to maintain cohesion? None of these explanations alone is sufficient, and the interplay of demographic, cognitive, and ecological factors remains a subject of debate. planetary context ensures that the story is not one of uninterrupted expansion, while humans spread widely, some regions empty and refill with each climatic oscillation. Genetic bottlenecks hint at contractions of population, while isolated refugees preserve distinctive tool traditions. Yet through all this, the evidence of beads, carvings, and ornaments demonstrates that symbolism endures even when numbers shrink, suggesting that once acquired symbolic traditions are not easily abandoned. To cross a continent carrying not only blades and spears but also beads and carvings is to place value in meaning beyond immediate survival. When groups meet, ornaments and carved figures may serve as tokens of shared humanity, ensuring recognition in a landscape that shifts with each century. The figurines of animals, the incised bones, the beads sewn into garments, all tell of a species that moves outward across immense spaces, yet carries inward continuity of practice. In the expansion of modern humans across Europe and Asia, art is not an ornament at the periphery of life, but a central thread of how small bands endure, identify themselves, and anchor memory in a world transformed by ice wind and distance. As modern humans expand across Eurasia, they meet populations already established in the varied landscapes of the continent. The Neanderthals, who for hundreds of thousands of years adapted to cold steppes, wooded valleys and cave shelters, shaping stone tools with practiced efficiency and hunting the large animals that roamed Ice Age Europe. For a long time, the image of Neanderthals portrayed them as devoid of symbolic life, a species focused on subsistence alone. Yet discoveries in recent decades have shifted that view, revealing pigments, ornaments, and engravings that suggest a capacity for symbolic behavior more complex than once assumed. In caves of Spain, such as La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardales, red pigment. Marks, ladder shapes, hand stencils, and discs have been dated with uranium-thorium techniques to more than 60,000 years ago, a time preceding the arrival of Homo sapiens in Western Europe. This finding implies that Neanderthals themselves produced these images, and if the dating holds secure, it expands the history of symbolic expression far deeper than the art of modern humans. Other sites contribute details at Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar, cross-hatched engravings incised on bedrock form deliberate geometric patterns that do not serve practical function. At Cueva de los Aviones, perforated shells stained with pigments appear in layers older than 45,000 years, again associated with Neanderthal occupation. Such artifacts indicate that ornament and mark-making were not exclusive to Homo sapiens, but shared at least in part by their close relatives. Lesser-known traces add to the picture in the French site of Châtel-Perronian culture, associated with Neanderthals. Pendants made from animal teeth and ivory fragments appear, their perforations drilled with careful rotation, while debate continues over whether these represent independent invention or influence from incoming modern humans. Their presence suggests interaction and exchange. In the same cultural horizon, pigment residues on stone tools and ornaments hint at deliberate application, reinforcing the argument for symbolic behavior. An unresolved mystery concerns the extent and consistency of Neanderthal art. Were these expressions rare experiments by a few groups or widespread traditions, now only glimpsed in fragments? The sparse record could reflect limited practice, or it could be the consequence of preservation bias and the shorter time span of Neanderthal populations compared with the later dominance of Homo sapiens. The question remains open, and each new find has potential to reshape the understanding of their cognitive world. At planetary scale, the encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals occur against the background of Ice Age climates, when glaciers advance across northern latitudes and steppe tundra environments dominate large parts of Europe. In such settings, groups follow herds across open plains, while in southern refuges, oak pine and beech forests persist, offering varied ecologies. The shifting of climate corridors means that populations repeatedly expand, contract, and reoccupy valleys and caves, creating conditions for contact zones where modern humans and Neanderthals overlap. Genetic evidence confirms that these meetings are not merely territorial encounters but include interbreeding, leaving between 1 and 2% of Neanderthal DNA in all non-African populations today. This genetic legacy testifies to intimate interaction, but whether cultural exchange accompanied it is less clear. Some researchers argue that Neanderthals adopted elements of symbolic practice through contact with Homo sapiens, while others emphasize the independent presence of pigments and ornaments in contexts preceding modern arrival. Either way, the boundary between the two species is less a sharp divide than a zone of overlap where ideas as well as genes may have been exchanged. A lesser-noted but striking detail comes from Bruniquel Cave in France, where Neanderthals arranged broken stalagmites into circular constructions more than 170,000 years ago, deep within the dark interior. The structures show evidence of fire and careful placement, suggesting a deliberate activity far removed from daily subsistence. While not art, in the figurative sense, these constructions point to symbolic or ritual dimensions in Neanderthal behavior long before the cave paintings of Homo sapiens. The unresolved enigma is what such structures signified without images or artifacts. To interpret, only the arrangement itself survives, leaving open whether it marked gathering ceremony or some unknown purpose. The scale of their world matches the rhythms of glacial Europe. Migrations of dozens or hundreds of kilometers bring groups into new valleys, while advances of ice displace populations southward. In this vast terrain, both species navigate survival and meaning, and the presence of pigments, ornaments, and engravings shows that Neanderthals, too, sought to inscribe identity and perhaps memory into matter. When modern humans encounter them, the symbolic traditions of both lineages meet. Whether blending or diverging, they share a continent where caves hold not only stone tools and hearths, but also marks of color and incised lines that resist easy classification. The persistence of these marks across sites indicates that art is not a sudden invention of one species alone, but an emergent property of human relatives, adapting to environments that challenge body and mind alike. The painted discs, engraved crosshatches, and stained shells of Neanderthal sites join the broader record of early symbolic life, underscoring that the impulse to mark surfaces and to invest objects with meaning is not unique to Homo sapiens, but part of a wider story of the genus Homo. What remains unknown is how far these practices extended, how deeply they shaped Neanderthal identity, and how much they influenced the flowering of art that follows with modern humans. Yet even in their ambiguity, the artifacts stand as witness. In caves darkened by millennia, traces of pigment and incision reveal that Neanderthals, too, participated in the long human search to leave enduring marks upon the world. Amid the landscapes of Ice Age Europe, portable carvings begin to appear, small figures shaped from ivory, bone antler, and stone that condense meaning into objects that can be carried, exchanged, and preserved across journeys. Unlike paintings bound to the walls of caves, these carvings are companions of movement, tangible symbols that travel with their makers. The archaeological record of the Swabian Jura in present-day Germany offers some of the earliest and most striking examples. From the caves of Vogelherd, Geissenklösterle, and Hohle emerge miniature carvings of mammoths, lions, horses, and hybrid beings dated to nearly 40,000 years ago. The figures cut from mammoth ivory reveal fine detail in tusks, manes, and muscular contours, and their creation required specialized tools, patience, and a knowledge of material that splits easily under pressure. The durability of ivory allows these works to survive, and microscopic study of tool marks shows careful planning of each incision, not hurried or accidental, but deliberate and skilled. A lesser-known detail is the presence of drilled holes in some of these figurines, allowing them to be suspended on cords or worn as ornaments, transforming them into objects visible in daily life, perhaps signaling identity, affiliation, or participation in shared traditions. Alongside animal carvings appears one of the earliest known depictions of the human form, the so-called Venus of Hohlefels, an ivory figurine emphasizing breasts and hips, dated to about 35,000 years ago. Its small size, perforated suspension ring and polished surface suggest it too was designed to be worn or displayed in movement. The exact meaning of such figures is unresolved. Some scholars see them as fertility symbols, others as representations of social identity teaching tools or ritual tokens. The absence of written records leaves interpretation open, yet their deliberate emphasis and the effort invested in their crafting affirm they held significance beyond ornament. Portable art is not confined to ivory. Carved bones with engraved lines, shaped antler points with added decoration, and stones with incised motifs all reveal that the impulse to transform functional material into carriers of meaning extends across Europe and beyond. At sites such as Dolny Vestonich in Moravia, small ceramic figures of animals appear fired in simple kilns more than 26,000 years ago. Many of these were deliberately broken, whether by accident or as part of a tradition remains uncertain, but their very existence demonstrates experimentation with materials and heat to create symbolic objects, a practice not required for survival, yet pursued nonetheless. Planetary conditions frame these innovations as the climate cools and glaciers extend. Groups gather in refuges along rivers such as the Danube and in valleys sheltered from harsh winds. These refuges foster more stable occupation, allowing the accumulation of cultural practices. The production of figurines and decorated objects in such settings suggests that art was not a marginal activity, but central to how communities organized themselves, how they transmitted ideas, and how they coped with uncertainty in a shifting environment. The scale of investment is evident in the sheer labor required to carve a mammoth ivory figure. Involves hours of scraping and polishing with stone tools to drill. Suspension holes requires precision to avoid fracture and to fire. Clay figures demands knowledge of temperature control and fuel management. Such effort reflects a value placed on meaning equal to that placed on subsistence. A lesser-noted discovery at Sungheir in present-day Russia reinforces this point. 2 children buried more than 30,000 years ago are accompanied by thousands of ivory beads, each drilled and polished, likely sewn onto garments. The beads alone represent years of cumulative labor, suggesting a community that invested enormous energy into symbolic display surrounding life and death. This tradition connects portable art with ritual practice, embedding meaning into the material world as a means of expressing identity and continuity. The unresolved mystery concerns why portable art flourishes in some regions, yet remains sparse in others. Was the production of figurines and decorated objects a local innovation in the Swabian Jura that later spread, or did similar traditions exist elsewhere but failed to preserve? Were animal carvings linked to ecological knowledge embodying animals crucial to survival, or did they serve as totems marking stories, myths, or group symbols? The answers remain hidden, yet the widespread presence of beads, pendants, and figurines across Europe suggests that portable art was not an isolated experiment but a shared dimension of Ice Age life. At planetary scale, these objects move with migrations traveling along rivers and across steppes as groups expand and contract with climate. A bead carved in ivory or a pendant drilled from animal tooth could journey hundreds of kilometers, exchanged between groups or carried across lifetimes. Such objects may have served as tokens of alliance, markers of kinship, or mnemonic devices embedding memory into durable material. The scale of travel was vast. Distances greater than from Madrid to Warsaw were covered by bands following reindeer herds or mammoth steppe routes, and across these journeys, small symbolic objects acted as anchors of meaning, ensuring continuity across shifting landscapes. In their portability lies resilience. when glaciers advanced valleys emptied or herds altered migration. The carved figurine or bead could carry forward identity and tradition even when territories changed. A lesser-known but telling aspect is the presence of unfinished or broken figurines in archaeological layers, evidence of learning and failure suggesting that knowledge of carving was taught and practiced, not confined to a few, but part of a wider cultural repertoire. This indicates that symbolic practices were transmitted deliberately, ensuring their survival across generations. The mystery remains of why certain forms human figures with emphasized features, hybrid beings combining animal and human traits, carefully detailed depictions of mammoth and lion were chosen. Do hybrid figures represent mythic beings, shamanic visions or metaphors we cannot decode? Do Venus figurines encode social ideals, reproductive emphasis, or concepts of continuity? The material evidence does not answer, but the persistence of these forms across thousands of years affirms that they were meaningful in ways consistent enough to be replicated and carried forward. In the long perspective of planetary change, portable carvings mark a new dimension of human adaptation. They transform meaning into material that survives travel, death, and time, embedding culture into objects that endure beyond individual lives. They reflect a scale of investment that equates symbolic expression with survival strategies, ensuring that when humans crossed rivers, plains, and mountain passes, they carried not only tools and fire, but also images, ornaments, and carvings that sustained memory and identity. These objects stand as testimony that the making of art was never confined to walls hidden in caves, but woven into the very movement of human life across a restless Ice Age world. Among the most delicate traces of Ice Age symbolism are the earliest musical instruments, fragile yet durable enough to survive tens of millennia, and to tell us that sound, rhythm, and melody formed part of the same symbolic flowering as painting and carving. In the caves of the Swabian Jura, where ivory figurines were carved, archaeologists have uncovered flutes made from bird bone and mammoth ivory, their hollow forms pierced with finger holes and smoothed edges. At Geysen Klösterler Cave, a vulture bone flute, more than 40,000 years old, preserves 5 carefully spaced holes along its length, and its broken end reveals the notch of a mouthpiece shaped to channel breath. Radiocarbon dating places it among the earliest instruments known, suggesting that music accompanied modern humans as they entered and settled Europe. Mammoth ivory flutes from whole fells show even greater complexity. Ivory had to be split, longitudinally hollowed, and then refitted with precision to create a tube that would not leak air, a task demanding both technical knowledge and considerable time. That people invested such effort indicates that music was valued, not incidental part of their symbolic repertoire. A lesser-known but striking detail lies in the wear patterns on some instruments. Microscopic analysis suggests repeated handling and playing, showing that these objects were not made as isolated experiments but used regularly. Reconstructions played by experimental archaeologists produce tones comparable to modern flutes, capable of scales and melodies, reinforcing the idea that music was structured, not merely noise. The unresolved mystery is what purpose music served. Was it primarily for social cohesion, for ritual, for teaching, or for communication? Across distance, ethnographic parallels suggest that song binds groups, regulates emotion, and transmits stories. But we cannot assign these roles with certainty to Ice Age flutes. What is clear is that music joins visual art, carving, and ornament as evidence of a symbolic world that extended beyond immediate survival. At planetary scale, the presence of music aligns with periods of migration and settlement during the fluctuating climates of the upper Paleolithic. As glaciers wax and wane, human groups disperse and contract, moving across corridors from the Danube Valley to the open plains of Central Europe. The scale of such movement means that gatherings would sometimes bring together dozens of individuals, rare in small band life, and in such gatherings music could synchronize collective action, amplify ritual, or mark identity. The very portability of flutes makes them well suited for a mobile life, unlike paintings anchored to caves. Music travels wherever people carry breath and instrument. The flutes found at Swabian sites likely accompanied groups on their seasonal movements, sounding across campfires, echoing in shelters, and resonating in caves whose acoustics amplified song. A lesser-known discovery at Isteritz Cave in the French Pyrenees adds breadth more than a dozen bone flutes. Some decorated occur in layers spanning thousands of years, suggesting continuity of musical practice across generations and regions. Their survival indicates that music was not an isolated tradition of one valley, but a widespread element of Ice-Age life. The unresolved enigma concerns how music intersected with other symbolic forms. Were flutes played in the same caves where animals were painted, combining sound and image in ceremonies illuminated by torchlight? Were they part of daily life, played for children or companions around hearths? Or were they reserved for special occasions, their notes signaling transitions, rites, or gatherings? The archaeological record cannot answer, yet the physical evidence of carefully crafted instruments and their wear from use attests that music was integral, not marginal. Planetary rhythms shape these practices. Abrupt warmings create intervals of expansion when groups spread into new valleys, and cold returns drive contraction into refugees, concentrating populations. In both settings, music could serve to preserve continuity, whether reinforcing bonds during expansion into unfamiliar terrain or sustaining morale and memory during contraction into crowded refugees. The scale of the labor required to craft an ivory flute underscores its significance. Splitting tusk, hollowing halves, aligning and sealing them with precision, all without metal tools, reflects extraordinary investment of time for an outcome not linked to direct subsistence. This commitment places music alongside art and ornament as a form of symbolic expression valued as highly as tools for survival. Another lesser-noted dimension is the acoustics of caves themselves. Studies show that painted chambers often correspond with points of strong echo or resonance. It is possible that music and painting were linked with sound, amplifying the effect of images in the shifting light of torches. Though speculative, the overlap of flutes, painted caves, and resonant chambers suggests a multimodal symbolic world in which sound, image, and space converged. The unresolved question is whether such practices were widespread across all groups or localized traditions. While flutes are rare in the archaeological record due to their fragility, the presence of multiple examples across different sites suggests that music was more common than preservation allows us to see. The scale of absence is itself telling. For every instrument recovered, many more must have been lost to decay, implying a much richer soundscape than the sparse remains suggest. A planetary perspective, one may consider that as sea levels fell and landscapes expanded, human groups walked distances longer than from Lisbon to Warsaw within lifetimes, and through such journeys, music could carry continuity, a rhythm that accompanied steps, a melody that connected scattered bands. Sound travels differently than image, yet its persistence in human societies points to deep roots. The Ice Age flutes show that by 40,000 years ago, humans had already discovered how to harness airbone and ivory into instruments capable of structured music. They stand as evidence that the symbolic flowering of the Upper Paleolithic was not only visual but auditory, embedding meaning into vibration and breath, as well as pigment and form. In this way, music joins painting, engraving, and ornament as a dimension of human identity, a practice that persists across millennia, shifting with climate and landscape, yet enduring in the resonance of sound. The fragile flutes of bone and ivory carried through glacial valleys and left in cave layers testify that early humans invested as much in the making of music as in the making of tools, shaping not only how they survived, but also how they express their place in a vast and changing world. Across Ice Age, Europe and beyond small beads, pendants and ornaments begin to multiply in the archaeological record, their scale modest, but their significance immense. Unlike cave paintings hidden in darkness, or carved figurines that require laborious effort, beads are intimate, worn on the body, strung on cords, sewn into garments, or exchanged between individuals. They carry meaning directly into daily life, broadcasting identity through color, material, and form. Archaeologists uncover them at sites stretching from Africa to Siberia, crafted from perforated shells, animal teeth, ivory bone, and even fossil materials. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, ostrich eggshell beads more than 70,000 years old demonstrate that this practice began long before humans entered Europe. In Europe itself, the tradition expands during the Upper Paleolithic, with strings of fox teeth, drilled bear claws, and polished ivory discs adorning burials and settlements. A lesser-known yet telling detail comes from the site of Dzudzuana Cave in Georgia, where flax fibers stained with pigment and twisted into threads more than 30,000 years old have been recovered. These threads suggest that beads and ornaments may have been sewn into clothing, transforming garments into moving displays of identity, a practice largely invisible in the archaeological record but hinted at through such rare finds. The unresolved mystery is the exact function of ornaments. Did they serve primarily as aesthetic decoration, as markers of group membership, as indicators of status or achievement, or as tokens exchanged to seal alliances and relationships? Ethnographic analogy suggests all these functions may have coexisted, yet direct inference remains speculative. What is certain is that the labor invested in crafting ornaments and the widespread distribution of similar forms confirm their deep significance in human life. At planetary scale, these ornaments coincide with the expansion of Homo sapiens into diverse environments, from the cold steppes of northern Europe to the temperate valleys of the Caucasus and the open plains of Siberia. The distances traveled were vast, hundreds to thousands of kilometers across generations, and in such mobility ornaments likely provided continuity, portable symbols of belonging carried from one camp to the next. They also served as durable markers of connection. Perforated shells found far from the sea, transported inland along trade routes, demonstrate networks of movement and exchange that spanned entire regions. The scale of such networks reflects a human capacity for long-distance contact rare among earlier hominins. Beads also reveal patterns of standardization. At Sunghir in Russia, burials of 2 children and an older man contain thousands of beads sewn into garments. Each bead is shaped, drilled, and polished with remarkable consistency, suggesting not casual production, but a tradition with shared standards perhaps taught across generations. The time investment was enormous. Estimates suggest that producing the beads in a single Sunghir burial would require tens of thousands of hours of labor. Such dedication signals that ornaments held value equal to survival tasks embedded into the fabric of social and symbolic life. A lesser-known aspect of ornaments is their use in child burials. The lavish investment in young individuals too young to contribute to subsistence suggests that beads serve not only as personal adornment, but as statements about group identity, continuity, and perhaps belief in an existence beyond life. Such burials transform ornaments into vehicles of meaning across the threshold of death, embedding social values into material that endures beyond the body. The unresolved question remains whether ornaments served as language-like systems, encoding information about group affiliation or kinship in ways that could be read by outsiders. Some researchers propose that bead styles functioned as visible markers, allowing recognition and trust between strangers. Others caution that while style variation exists, its meaning cannot be assumed. The beads themselves remain mute, yet their proliferation suggests they carried communicative weight. At planetary scale, climatic oscillations frame the spread of ornament traditions. During colder stadials, populations retreat into refuges where cultural practices intensify, and ornaments may serve to reinforce group cohesion in crowded conditions. During warmer interstadials, when populations expand and contact increases, ornaments may facilitate interaction and exchange. Thus, the rhythms of climate shape the rhythms of symbolic life, with beads acting as anchors through cycles of expansion and contraction. The scale of production also points to teaching and apprenticeship. Microscopic analysis of drilled holes shows variation in technique from skillful rotation to clumsy attempts, indicating that bead-making was learned, practiced, and corrected. This suggests cultural transmission over generations, embedding knowledge not only of tools and hunting, but of symbolic forms. A lesser-known find from Grotte du Renne in France, associated with the Châtel-Perronian industry, includes ornaments attributed to Neanderthals. If these associations hold, they suggest that bead-making was not exclusive to Homo sapiens, further blurring the boundary between species. The unresolved debate is whether such finds reflect independent invention by Neanderthals, borrowing from Homo sapiens, or misattributed stratigraphy. Either way, the presence of ornaments in these layers underscores the antiquity and breadth of symbolic adornment. The scale of ornament networks is vast. Shells from the Mediterranean appear in sites hundreds of kilometers north. Fossil materials are carried far from their sources, and standardized bead forms spread across regions. These patterns reveal not isolated bands, but networks of contact that span entire landscapes, linking groups across distances longer than from Paris to Warsaw. Through such connections, ornaments serve as visible tokens of shared identity, ensuring recognition and continuity in a fragmented Ice Age world. In their accumulation, we see the persistence of human desire to embed meaning in the visible world, to carry identity on the body, and to invest labor in objects that outlast the immediate needs of survival. The beads, shells, and ornaments of Ice Age humans remind us that art was not confined to cave walls or figurines, but woven into the intimate texture of daily life. They signal that the making of art was not a marginal pursuit, but central to how humans lived, moved, and remembered. In each drilled tooth, each polished bead, each perforated shell, lies a fragment of the human story, a story carried across continents and climates, binding individuals into communities and communities into traditions that endure long after the hands that made them are gone. When humans venture into the deep interiors of caves to leave images on the walls, they transform natural spaces into canvases where stone pigment and light converge to create something that endures beyond a single generation. These caves, often miles in length, present narrow passages, chambers with echoing acoustics and ceilings adorned with mineral formations, yet they are chosen repeatedly as sites of artistic expression. At Chauvet in the Ardèche, panels of lions, rhinos, and horses stretch across curving walls painted with black charcoal and red ochre, the figures layered and shaded to create volume and motion. At Lascaux in France, discovered in the mid-20th century, the Hall of Bulls displays massive aurochs outlined in black and filled with ochre and yellow, their size overwhelming the human viewer, while smaller deer and horses crowd nearby, overlapping in dynamic compositions. The caves are not living spaces. Hearth remains, discarded bones and tools are sparse, and the arduous effort required to enter the deepest galleries shows that practical shelter was not the purpose. Instead, these underground chambers appear as designated spaces for meaning beyond subsistence, places where image and ritual intersect. A lesser-known detail is that not all decorated caves contain figurative art. Some, such as El Castillo in northern Spain, feature simple red discs or hand stencils made by blowing pigment around the palm. Others include series of dots, lines, or abstract signs whose purpose is unclear, yet whose placement suggests intentional design. In some caves, the images are found only in narrow corridors accessible only by crawling, hinting at deliberate restriction of access, perhaps to certain individuals or groups. The unresolved mystery remains why caves were chosen over open rock surfaces when the latter would have been easier to reach and more visible in daily life. Was the descent into darkness a symbolic act, a movement into a different realm where images gained power, or was the cave's stable environment chosen simply for its ability to preserve pigment across tens of millennia? Scholars continue to debate, but the evidence of repeated use of deep chambers indicates that the act of painting underground was itself part of the meaning. At planetary scale, the use of caves coincides with the cold landscapes of the upper Paleolithic, when glaciers covered much of northern Europe and open steppes stretched across the continent. The cave, by contrast, offered a microclimate cool, stable, and sheltered from wind and ice where firelight could reveal images with remarkable clarity. The scale of effort required to paint within these spaces was immense. Torches of pine or juniper had to be carried, lamps filled with animal fat-prepared pigment collected from distant outcrops, ground and mixed. To paint high ceilings, scaffolds of wood were erected, leaving post holes and niches in the walls that survive today. The labor of entering, preparing and painting was coordinated, suggesting collective activity and planning. A lesser noted but striking observation is the relationship between cave topography and image placement. Painters often chose surfaces whose natural contours suggested the forms of animals. A bulge becomes the shoulder of a bison, a crack becomes the horn of an aurochs, and undulations of stone are used to suggest motion when illuminated by flickering flame. This integration of natural form and painted figure reveals a sensitivity to the material of the cave itself, a dialogue between geology and image. The unresolved question is whether these choices were primarily aesthetic, exploiting natural features for realism, or whether they carried symbolic meaning as if the animals already existed in the rock and were revealed through pigment. At planetary perspective, the caves also align with sound. Acoustic studies show that decorated chambers often coincide with spots of strong echo or resonance, suggesting that sound, singing, chanting, or music from flutes may have accompanied painting or ritual. The combination of darkness, firelight, sound, and image would have transformed the cave into a sensory world distinct from the surface. While evidence of sound use cannot be proven, the correlation raises the possibility of multi-sensory ceremonies that embedded art within a larger performance. The scale of cave art is staggering. At Altamira in Spain, the ceiling of polychrome bison stretches across more than 18 meters, the figures shaded with sophisticated techniques that use multiple pigments for depth. At Rouffignac, kilometers of passage contain hundreds of mammoths etched into soft rock with fingers or tools. These are not isolated experiments, but vast programs of imagery maintained over generations. Some caves, such as Chauvet, show superimposition of images across centuries, suggesting revisiting and renewal of panels long after their first creation. A lesser-known discovery at Chauvet includes evidence of footprints on the cave floor preserved in clay. Among them are the tracks of a child walking alongside a wolf or dog-like canid, both moving together along a passage. The coincidence of footprints preserved beside paintings evokes the presence of life in these dark galleries, though the relationship between child and animal remains unknown. The unresolved mystery of meaning endures. Were the caves theatres for myth sites of teaching about animal behaviour, stages for initiation, or sanctuaries for spiritual practices? Archaeologists have advanced many hypotheses, yet none commands universal agreement. What is certain is that caves chosen across regions and millennia became central to the symbolic life of Upper Paleolithic humans. At planetary scale, as sea levels fell and steppes stretched wider, humans traveled distances of hundreds of kilometers following herds, yet they returned repeatedly to the same decorated caves. These sites became fixed points of memory in shifting landscapes, enduring as landmarks of meaning when glaciers advanced and retreated. The persistence of cave art across thousands of years testifies that it was more than passing ornament. It was a tradition embedded deeply into the rhythms of Ice Age life. The scale of artistic flowering visible in caves across France, Spain, and beyond underscores the centrality of art in human adaptation. It was not peripheral, but fundamental, shaping how groups related to animals, landscapes, and one another. The caves, with their painted chambers, stand as enduring records of this symbolic world, preserving images that continue to speak tens of thousands of years after their makers vanished. In their depth, darkness, and artistry, they reveal that early humans sought not only to survive, but to inscribe meaning into the very stone of the earth, making the cave a canvas where memory, imagination, and identity converged. Among the most striking qualities of Paleolithic cave art is the sense of motion that emerges from lines, contours, and superimpositions, as if painters sought not merely to depict animals, but to capture them in the midst of life. At Chauvet Cave, lions are drawn in groups with layered outlines, their legs repeated, as if striding together, their heads turned in synchronized direction, creating the impression of a pride moving across the rock. At Lascaux, the galloping horses of the axial gallery are depicted with legs outstretched in sequences that echo modern animation frames conveying speed and rhythm. Such dynamic representation is remarkable given the flickering torchlight in which the images were made and viewed. A lesser-known detail is the use of perspective and shading. Some bison are painted with horns shown obliquely, not flat in profile but angled, to suggest depth and innovation rare in ancient art, yet mastered by Ice Age painters. They employed techniques such as hatching, scraping, and blending of pigments to simulate musculature and volume, creating animals that seem to emerge from stone. The unresolved question is how such technical skill developed. Was it the product of long apprenticeships within communities transmitted from master to novice, or did it arise spontaneously among individuals with unusual visual acuity? The absence of practice sketches makes this difficult to answer, though engraved plaquettes of bone and stone may have served as portable canvases where forms were tested. What is certain is that the sophistication of technique rivals much later art traditions, showing that the capacity for complex representation was present tens of millennia ago. At planetary scale, these representations occur during the last glacial period, when herds of horse bison and reindeer moved in vast numbers across Eurasia. For groups reliant on these animals for meat, hide, bone, and sinew, close observation was part of survival. The scale of migration herds moving hundreds of kilometers seasonally would have impressed upon humans the rhythms of motion that they later captured in pigment. The artists were not inventing from imagination alone, but transcribing knowledge of animal behavior, translating lived experience into enduring form. A lesser-noted discovery reinforces this connection in the cave of Les Trois Frères. A series of engraved reindeer appear, with antlers tilted forward, a detail that corresponds precisely with rutting behavior observed in modern reindeer. Such accuracy suggests careful study of animals, perhaps embedded in hunting practice, yet the translation into art shows that knowledge was given symbolic weight. The unresolved mystery is the purpose of depicting animals in motion. Was it to instruct hunters demonstrating behavior patterns? Was it part of ritual aimed at ensuring success in the chase, or was it an aesthetic impulse, a desire to fix, in enduring form, the beauty of the animals that shaped daily life? Each hypothesis finds some support, but the evidence does not resolve them. At planetary perspective, caves become archives not only of species, but of ecological change. At Chauvet, the presence of woolly rhinoceros, cave lions, and mammoths reflects the cold steppe tundra environment, while at Lascaux, depictions of aurochs, stags, and ibex suggest a somewhat milder climate with mixed woodland and grassland. The animals painted are not random but reflect the living communities of their time, offering a record of shifting ecosystems. The scale of artistic attention to animals underscores their centrality in human life. Nearly all figures are non-human, and humans themselves appear rarely and ambiguously, often hybridized with animal traits. This asymmetry suggests that animals occupied a symbolic place larger than humans, embodying power, knowledge, and perhaps spiritual significance. A lesser-known example comes from Rouffignac Cave, where more than 100 mammoths are engraved and painted, an extraordinary concentration given the difficulty of representing such massive creatures. The repetition of mammoths far beyond their subsistence value suggests symbolic importance that exceeds practical need. The unresolved enigma is why certain animals were emphasized, while others common in diet, such as fish or small game, are largely absent. Was art selective in highlighting animals of power and prestige, or did cultural taboos restrict what could be represented? These choices remain unexplained. The scale of effort to depict motion required not only observation, but adaptation to the cave environment. Painters exploited the undulating surfaces of rock to animate figures. A horse painted across a convex bulge appears to shift as torchlight moves its flank, swelling and contracting like breath. In some cases, multiple outlines of legs or heads are drawn, producing a blur that, when lit by flickering flame, creates the illusion of running. These techniques reveal a sophisticated understanding of how perception works in low light, an interplay of form, shadow, and motion that turns stone walls into living scenes. At planetary scale, this creativity speaks to the adaptability of humans in landscapes dominated by ice cold and vast distances. They found ways to transform darkness into theatre, creating spaces where motion, sound, and image merged into a shared experience. A lesser-noted observation is the placement of sequences along pathways within caves. At Lascaux, animals are arranged as if encountered in procession, guiding viewers deeper into the cavern. This suggests that art was not static, but experienced in movement, a narrative unfolding through space, as people walked with torches, seeing animals emerge and vanish with each turn. The unresolved mystery is whether this narrative was intentional storytelling or simply accumulation of images over time. Superimpositions show that panels were revisited across generations, complicating any simple reading of narrative. Yet the overall impression remains of scenes animated by motion, structured in ways that engage viewers as participants in journeys through stone. At planetary context, such journeys mirror the migrations of herds and humans alike. Just as herds traverse valleys seasonally, so too do humans traverse caves, symbolically following paths lined with animals in perpetual motion. The scale of these representations conveys a sense of continuity between human life and the cycles of the natural world, embedding observation into symbolic practice. The art of animals in motion thus embodies not only technical skill but a worldview in which humans saw themselves within the movement of other beings, recording not static images but rhythms of life. In their layered outlines, repeated legs, and angled horns, the painters of Ice Age Europe captured both knowledge and imagination, leaving to the stone a record of creatures that moved through their world and through their minds. What remains uncertain is the exact blend of utility, ritual, and aesthetic that motivated this artistry, but what remains enduring is the fact of its existence across tens of thousands of years. The animals still stride across cave walls, their motion frozen yet alive, reminders that early humans sought to inscribe not only form but movement, not only presence but vitality into the enduring fabric of stone. Among the most haunting motifs of Ice Age art are the handprints that appear across continents, images not of animals or abstract signs but of the human body itself, pressed or stenciled onto stone. In caves from Spain to Indonesia, hands emerge in negative outline pigment blown through hollow bones or reeds around a palm pressed against the wall, leaving the shape of fingers and palm in stark silhouette. At El Castillo Cave in northern Spain, some of these hand stencils are dated to at least 40,000 years ago, placing them among the earliest known art in Europe. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, red stenciled hands of similar age appear alongside depictions of animals, suggesting that the practice arose independently in different regions as humans spread across the globe. A lesser known but significant detail is the diversity of the hands themselves. Analysis of finger proportions shows that many stencils belong to women and children, not only to adult men. This broad participation challenges older assumptions that cave art was the domain of hunters alone and suggests that the making of images involved whole communities. The unresolved question is what the handprints meant. Were they simple acts of presence, signatures left to say I was here? Were they part of initiation rituals binding individuals into group identity? Or did they serve as contact with the spirit world, the hand-touching stone as a threshold between realms? The silence of the archaeological record leaves these possibilities open. At planetary scale, the recurrence of hand stencils across continents underscores a shared human impulse. From the limestone caves of France and Spain to the volcanic shelters of Indonesia and the sandstone galleries of Australia, separated by thousands of kilometers and different ecologies, the same gesture appears: the human hand fixed in pigment. The scale of this distribution suggests that marking the hand was one of the most widespread symbolic acts of early humans, carried across migrations that spanned continents. The technique itself is simple but profound. Pigment, usually red ochre, is ground and mixed with water or saliva, then blown through a tube around the hand. The negative image records not only shape, but the spread of fingers, the pressure of palm against stone, the breath that propelled pigment. Each stencil is both an image and a trace of life, embedding an individual's body and breath into enduring form. A lesser-noted discovery at Gargas Cave in France adds complexity. Some hand stencils are missing fingers or show truncated shapes. Scholars debate whether these reflect ritual mutilation, frostbite injury in harsh Ice Age winters, or deliberate bending of fingers during stenciling to create symbolic patterns. Whatever the cause, the variation suggests that hands carried layers of meaning beyond mere representation. The unresolved mystery deepens with the repetition of hand motifs. In some caves, dozens cluster together, overlapping as if multiple individuals participated in collective acts of marking. Were these gatherings of families, clans, or wider groups? Were they ceremonies marking coming of age, alliances, or memory of ancestors? Without context, we cannot know, but the density of stencils indicates events of shared significance. At planetary perspective, the persistence of hand stencils across tens of thousands of years parallels climatic cycles that reshaped landscapes. As glaciers advanced and sea levels dropped, humans migrated into new regions, yet the gesture of the hand persisted, adapting to new caves and cliffs. The scale of continuity is remarkable, a tradition carried from Ice Age Europe to islands of Southeast Asia and beyond, reflecting a symbolic act so fundamental it endured across vast distances and times. A lesser-noted but evocative case lies in Patagonia, at Cueva de las Manos, where thousands of hand stencils, some dated to 9,000 years ago, cover walls in dense arrays. Though much later than the Upper Paleolithic, this site shows the extraordinary longevity of the tradition, suggesting that hand marking remained meaningful across cultures and epochs. The unresolved question is why the hand, above all symbols, carried such resonance. Was it because the hand is both tool and identity, the instrument of survival and the mark of individuality? Was the act of placing the hand on stone an assertion of presence in a vast and often hostile world? Or did it symbolize connection to earth, a bond between body and landscape? The universality of the motif hints at meanings deeply embedded in human cognition. At planetary scale, the hand connects the intimate and the vast. Each stencil is the size of a palm, yet together they span continents echoing across caves separated by oceans. The scale of human migration journeys longer than from Lisbon to Beijing did not erase this practice, but carried it forward, embedding continuity across space and time. A lesser-known observation from microscopic analysis reveals that some hand stencils were made with pigment containing mineral crystals that spark under torchlight, suggesting that in the darkness of caves the hands may have glimmered faintly, adding a sensory dimension now lost. The unresolved enigma is how such effects were perceived by those who made them, and whether the combination of darkness fire and glowing pigment transformed the simple hand into something sacred. At planetary context, one may see the hand as both personal and collective individual breath and body fixed in pigment, yet joined with others in clusters that form communal statements. This duality mirrors human life in the Ice Age, small groups struggling for survival, yet linked into broader traditions that spanned landscapes and generations. The scale of symbolic continuity embodied in hand stencils affirms that early humans did not merely survive, but sought to leave lasting traces of their presence, embedding identity into stone. In their simplicity and ubiquity, handprints remind us that art was not reserved for elite specialists or rare occasions, but could involve all members of a group, from children to adults, from women to men. The hand itself, instrument of tool-making and gesture, became also a symbol, fixed in pigment, a mark that endures when all else decays. Across continents and millennia, hands in negative silhouette remind us of the human desire to inscribe self and community into the enduring world. They stand as one of the most direct and intimate connections to Ice Age. People evidence not only of artistic capacity, but of shared humanity across time and space. Deep within the chambers of painted caves where daylight never enters, the role of firelight becomes inseparable from the creation and experience of art. Without lamps and torches, the images of bison, horses, and lions would remain in darkness, unseen by the eyes that painted them. Archaeologists have found the remains of lamps carved from limestone, their shallow basins blackened by soot and still containing traces of animal fat once used as fuel. Wicks made of moss or twisted plant fiber would have drawn the fuel upward, producing steady flames that burned for hours. Alongside these are charred torch fragments of pine or juniper, their resinous wood chosen for bright, smoky light. The glow of such flames was dim by modern standards, but in the pitch dark of the cave it transformed walls into living surfaces. The flicker of fire animated images, making the legs of a painted horse seem to move, the horns of a bison to shift, the mane of a lion to ripple. A lesser-known detail is that soot patterns on ceilings preserved the sweep of torches arcs that map human movement thousands of years ago. In some caves, these traces form overlapping fans, showing that groups advanced together, illuminating walls as they passed. The unresolved mystery is whether firelight was used only to aid visibility for painting, or whether the interplay of shadow and flame was integral to ritual, creating a sensory experience that imbued the images with power. At planetary scale, the use of fire for art coincides with its centrality in survival. Fire was already essential for cooking, warmth protection, and tool-making. Its extension into caves for artistic purposes reflects not only practical adaptation, but symbolic imagination. To carry flame into the depths was to extend human presence into a realm of perpetual night, an act that mirrored the broader human capacity to reshape environments. The scale of preparation required is clear. Fat from hunted animals had to be collected and stored, torches shaped, and dried pigments gathered and ground. Entering the cave demanded coordination, for without sufficient fuel, darkness would quickly reclaim the passages. This collective effort suggests that painting and viewing were not solitary tasks but communal events requiring planning and participation. A lesser-noted observation comes from lamp soot residues analyzed for isotopes, showing that reindeer fat was often used as fuel. This indicates not only knowledge of which materials burned best, but also choices that tied subsistence and symbolism together. The same animals hunted for food provided fuel for light that illuminated their painted images on stone. The unresolved question is how fire itself was perceived in these contexts. Was the lamp merely a tool, or was the flame part of the ritual, its glow considered a living presence? Ethnographic parallels suggest that fire often holds symbolic value, yet the archaeological record remains silent on how Ice Age people conceived it. What is certain is that fire was essential to the transformation of caves into ritual spaces. At planetary perspective, the interplay of firelight and image mirrors larger cycles of illumination and darkness in Ice Age environments. Long winters, short summers, and shifting glacial climates made light itself a precious resource. In the cave, controlled flame replicated the sun in miniature, bringing warmth and vision to a space where no natural light penetrated. The scale of such symbolism is immense. Just as the sun governs the rhythms of climate and migration, so too did the lamp govern the rhythms of painting and ritual in subterranean spaces. A lesser-known but striking discovery comes from Chauvet, where researchers identified clusters of red dots on cave walls aligned with lamp niches. These may have been created as markers to guide movement, or as signs visible only in the glow of a lamp, invisible in darkness. The unresolved enigma is whether these marks were purely functional or carried symbolic significance, perhaps mapping routes or demarcating sacred zones. At planetary scale, caves also preserve evidence of fire as sound and heat. Acoustic studies show that decorated chambers often coincide with areas of strong echo, suggesting that chants or songs may have accompanied torchlit ceremonies. The combination of flickering images and resonant sound would have created an immersive experience blending sensory dimensions into a unified performance. Whether intended as ritual teaching or celebration, such experiences would have shaped memory and identity. The scale of investment in fire-based ritual spaces underscores that art was not peripheral. Transporting pigment-building scaffolds, carving lamps, and maintaining flame required time and coordination equal to subsistence tasks. That groups devoted such effort reveals the importance of symbolic life in Ice Age societies. A lesser-known find from Cognac Cave in France demonstrates this. Further calcite flows over paintings preserve the impressions of torch burns, showing that images were revisited repeatedly across centuries. People returned to rekindle flame and relight images, reaffirming traditions across generations. The unresolved mystery is whether such revisits were tied to specific seasons, rites of passage, or responses to environmental change. Without records, we cannot know, but the persistence of visits over millennia shows that caves became enduring landmarks of symbolic geography. At planetary perspective, one may consider the scale of journeys required. Some decorated caves lie many kilometers from seasonal camps accessible only through deliberate travel. Carrying torches and lamps into their depths transformed movement into ritual pilgrimage, embedding geography into symbolic life. Just as rivers and valleys structured subsistence, so too did caves structure memory and meaning. The interplay of firelight and pigment thus joins broader planetary rhythms. The sun governs climate, the hearth governs survival, and the lamp governs art. The scale of connection between these levels reveals the centrality of fire in human existence. In the torchlit chambers of Chauvet, Altamira, and Lascaux, images come alive under flame. Animals stride and breathe, and human handprints glow red against stone. The unresolved enigma is why such experiences were pursued with such dedication, but the evidence makes clear that firelight was not only a tool, but a medium of transformation. Through flame, darkness became image, stone became symbol, and cave became canvas. At planetary scale, this capacity to transform environments through fire marks humanity's unique path, a path that linked survival with symbolism, necessity with imagination. The enduring soot stains, lamp fragments, and torch marks remind us that the art of the caves was inseparable from the art of light, a collaboration between human intention and the elemental power of fire. The impulse to create images was not confined to Europe, but appears independently across continents, revealing that symbolic expression was a global phenomenon of the late Pleistocene. In the karst caves of Sulawesi, Indonesia, hand stencils and red ochre depictions of animals such as anoa and babirusa date to more than 40,000 years ago, contemporaneous with the earliest European paintings. These images, executed with techniques similar to those of Europe, show that distant human populations separated by thousands of kilometers and different ecologies developed parallel traditions of cave art. A lesser-known yet striking detail from Sulawesi is a painting of a babirusa, a pig deer, depicted with a sense of motion and careful attention to tusks, demonstrating close observation of a species unique to the island. The unresolved question is whether such traditions arose independently or reflect a symbolic repertoire carried out of Africa and adapted in new regions. The presence of early art in both Europe and Southeast Asia suggests either rapid innovation across multiple populations or a shared legacy that traveled with migrating groups. At planetary scale, these traditions reflect the vast expansion of Homo sapiens. By 40 to 50,000 years ago, humans had crossed into Sahul, the continent uniting Australia and New Guinea during lower sea levels, bringing with them the capacity for symbolic expression. In Arnhem Land and the Kimberley, Australia, rock shelters preserve layered galleries of paintings spanning tens of thousands of years. The Guion figures, slender human forms with elaborate adornments, testify to an enduring tradition of figurative art. In Kakadu, naturalistic depictions of fish turtles and kangaroos painted in red ochre record close ecological knowledge. The scale of continuity is immense. While many of these paintings are younger than their European counterparts, they demonstrate that symbolic traditions in Australia persisted unbroken for millennia, surviving into historical times. A lesser-noted aspect of Australian rock art is the use of superimposition. New paintings were layered over older ones, creating palimpsests that accumulated meaning across generations. This practice suggests that rock surfaces served as living archives, continually renewed rather than frozen in time. The unresolved mystery is how meanings were transmitted across such long spans. Oral traditions may have carried explanations, but without direct evidence we can only see the accumulation of images and infer their significance. A planetary perspective, art in Australia coincides with human adaptation to environments ranging from tropical coasts to arid deserts. The scale of movement required to settle the continent, journeys longer than from Madrid to Moscow, demonstrates that symbolic traditions were carried across vast ecological frontiers. Similar patterns emerge elsewhere. In Africa, engraved ostrich eggshells and ochre from sites such as Apollo 11 cave in Namibia show abstract designs dating back 30,000 years, while rock shelters across southern Africa preserve later paintings of animals and human figures that continue into Holocene times. These traditions affirm that symbolic expression was not limited to Europe but integral to human life across the globe. A lesser-known example comes from the Maros Pangkep caves of Sulawesi, where a panel depicts human figures interacting with animals in what may be the oldest known narrative scene, dated to at least 44,000 years ago. This challenges the assumption that narrative art developed only later, suggesting that humans in Southeast Asia already conceived complex symbolic representations. The unresolved enigma is whether such scenes reflect myth, ritual, or record of events. Without written context, we cannot know, but the very act of linking multiple figures into a coherent tableau marks a cognitive leap in representation. At planetary scale, the appearance of art in multiple regions demonstrates convergent evolution of symbolic behavior, or perhaps the deep inheritance of traditions rooted in earlier African populations. Either way, the scale of distribution underscores that by the time humans spread across the globe, art was already central to identity. The persistence of similar motifs, hand stencils, animal depictions, abstract marks across continents suggests a shared human inclination to inscribe meaning onto stone. A lesser-noted aspect of this global record is the choice of pigment. Across regions, red ochre dominates, a mineral that occurs widely and is easily processed. Its consistent use hints at symbolic preference for red, a color associated with lifeblood and vitality in many later cultures. Whether this symbolism already existed in the Ice Age is uncertain, but the ubiquity of red pigment across continents is striking. The unresolved question remains why art arose in so many places at roughly the same time. Some scholars propose a demographic threshold. As populations grew, symbolic traditions flourished to maintain cohesion. Others suggest that climatic instability spurred ritual and art as responses to uncertainty. Still others emphasize cognitive developments, such as advances in language or social learning. No single explanation suffices, but the global record shows that once art appeared, it persisted, woven into the structure of human life. At planetary perspective, these traditions mirror the expansion of Homo sapiens across environments from icebound steppes to tropical islands. The scale of journeys was immense, crossing seas to reach Sahul, traversing deserts to reach interior Africa, navigating mountains into Central Asia, yet art traveled with them. Wherever humans went, they left images, ornaments, and symbols, binding presence into landscape. A lesser-noted but evocative example lies in the Philippines, where engravings on rock surfaces depict geometric designs thousands of years old, part of a tradition that, though younger, extends the global pattern of symbolic marking. The unresolved enigma is whether all such traditions share a single origin or represent independent invention. Genetic evidence shows that humans spreading across Eurasia and into Sahul carried with them deep connections to African ancestors. It is possible that the capacity for art was already established before dispersal flowering, wherever conditions allowed. Alternatively, similar needs and cognitive capacities may have led to parallel invention. Either way, the result is the same art emerges as a universal feature of humanity. At planetary scale, the global spread of art demonstrates that symbolic expression was not marginal, but central, carried across seas, deserts and mountains, embedded into survival as much as into imagination. From Sulawesi to Arnhem Land, from Europe to Africa, the earliest artists used stone pigment and surface to leave enduring marks of identity. Their works remind us that the making of art is not the possession of one lineage or region, but the inheritance of all, a practice born of humanity's shared journey across a changing planet.